I'm now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is Michael Katz. Michael, am I allowed to call you the professor, or is that just a Feinbaum thing?
I take compliments wherever I can get them these days. The only one that is off limits is doctor, because my family is actual doctors, and that's just stolen valor. And I'm not. I don't have like an actual PhD or anything. So I
Yeah.
have students will email me Dr. Katz, and I'll be like, I'm not going to correct them, but let's not do this anymore.
Dr. Katz is pretty cool, though.
It's flattering. It's flattering. But yeah, it's definitely stolen valor. My dad's a surgeon. Like I'm not gonna fight him on that one.
You're in a crowded group of people, you and your dad, and somebody yells out, Dr. Katz, and you both turn around. You can't do that.
Yeah, it's like that meme of like the person on the plane. It's like, is there a doctor on board? And it's like, oh well, your mathematics degree is sure gonna help here. Like, yeah,
Yeah, just leave it to email. Nothing wrong with that. Speaking of Feinbaum, I wanted to ask you about Lane. Seeing Lane's segment on Feinbaum at SEC spring meetings and seeing their back and forth was just a reminder of a few things. One, they need a show together. They definitely do. I know from conversations that I've had with Paul that he and Lane have just a really good relationship that might not always come across, but it definitely did in that 4-minute clip that they put out there. And they obviously have such a great rapport. Two is that Lane is somehow aging in reverse. And I would never tell this to his face because the only time I've ever done that, he was like, why would you say that to another man? I was like, I don't know, man. I thought I was just giving you a compliment. But he doesn't come across as a coach that's on the edge after a disappointing season. How has he come across to you and to people that cover this on a daily basis after the last few months?
Yeah, I mean, to start with that segment, it had like big time like The Office vibes, where there were just like a lot of pauses, and like I was just waiting for like the pan out or like just like the frame on Paul, who would be Jim, or like I was just like, this is just they're perfect together. I love it. Yeah, and they're both like open about how their relationship maybe got off to a rocky start. With Paul famously saying that Lane was the Miley Cyrus of college football, and then Lane got fired that next day from SC, and Lane jokingly always blames Paul for that. So it's a hilarious relationship. I think that last season, there was just so much promise, and this team was so good. I mean, this was the number 2 scoring defense in the country and the number 3 scoring offense, and you lost 3 games by 13 points. One of them where you didn't trail until the game was over, that LSU game. I mean, that's like surreal stuff that happened to them. I think it was disappointing. I know that this team had really high expectations when you bring back the sort of players they brought back, like Jackson Dart and all those guys, and you brought in the transfer portal class that was as good as we thought it was going to be. That's a team that I think, if they had made the playoff, I think to make a run, but they didn't. So it's always a big what if. But I think that as frustrating as that probably was, and as, I think from the outside perspective, no one's expecting this team to be a preseason top 5 team right now. That's just not, there's too many unknowns. You lose 18 starters, whatever it is, new quarterback. There's a lot of unknowns, but I think Lane is comfortable with what he's built in the sense that they've got really high caliber players, whether it's through traditional recruiting, the transfer portal. They've got their coordinators still, and they've established a thing where it's, he's 5 years in, and it hasn't been a flash in the pan. Their worst season was that 8-5 season, and then for most programs, for Ole Miss historically, that's a pretty good season. I think most Ole Miss fans would have taken that. I think this program's in a really good place. I think he's comfortable. We haven't gotten too in the weeds on is he staying or is he going conversations the last couple of years. 2022, we all remember the Auburn stuff. That was insane. We haven't really had a situation like that the last couple of years, and I think that has probably led to him being a little bit more comfortable too.
I think that there's probably only one other SEC team in the playoff era that you could say is the most disappointing in terms of the pieces that you had and what it ultimately produced. And it's 2023 LSU, just with how historically great that offense was And we'll look back on that 10 years from now and we'll go, wait a minute, that team didn't even make the playoff. They didn't play for an SEC championship, no New Year's Six Bowl. Like what in the world happened? And that LSU team still, though, had way more holes than this past Ole Miss team. And that's kind of the crazy thing, is that people might forget how good this defense was. And historically speaking, the Ole Miss defenses have had a really low floor, even during the Kiffin era. And so you had that figured out with 5 guys getting drafted there. You had your first round quarterback, something Lane has never had as a head coach, all these different things. And it still didn't even yield a 12-team playoff berth. Ole Miss fans, I think they're well within their right to feel like that will forever sting. Have you gotten that sense from them that they truly feel like that was a missed opportunity, even if the program is in a really good place right now?
100%. I mean, listen, you never know what the next years hold. You don't know how what sort of cards are going to be dealt. But this was a team that, listen, you went 11-2 the year before. You came back with a far better roster. There's no way that you lose more games than you did the year before, right? And you had an easier schedule by all, metrics and whatnot. But yeah, this college football is just, it's fickle. Everything that went right for them in 22, because they had a lot of they won all their close games in 23. The LSU game, the Auburn game, every break went their way that year. I mean, if you line up the 2023 Ole Miss team and 24 Ole Miss team, the 24 team wipes the field with them. But luck plays a factor, and it just didn't happen for them this past year. And I think that's probably what's frustrating too, is that everybody knows that the 2024 Ole Miss team, statistically, personnel-wise, I mean, look, you had the most draft picks in the common, 7-round draft era from this team. You had 2 first-rounders. And that, this is one of the best Ole Miss teams probably ever if you're looking at all those things, and it still got you to the Gator Bowl. And yeah, you won the Gator Bowl and you beat the hell out of Port Duke, and everybody came back for that game, and it was this great story. But I think there's a lot of what if, because again, we saw Ohio State was the coldest team in the country, and they got into the playoff and they just made their move. Ole Miss felt like a team that if they got in, they were going to be a problem. And I think that's probably it's going to haunt a lot of people.
What was your take on Lane wanting to send a message to the selection committee with the Gator Bowl against Duke?
Listen, I understand the frustration of just let us in and see what happens. But at the same time, don't lose to Kentucky, right? Don't lose to a team that, ended up winning 4 games? I think they were 4-8, something like that. Don't lose to, LSU. Yeah, that's a tough one. Baton Rouge is a tough place to play, but you led that game the entire game. And of course the Florida debacle. That thing just fell apart like crazy. So, I think the big one is probably the Kentucky game. If they win that game, they make the playoff. It's for sure. They can lose those other 2 and no one cares. So I understand Lane's frustration in terms of, if you're trying to get the best teams in college football to play in the tournament, Ole Miss would be one of those teams. I don't think anybody can question, if you looked at them, they were one of the 12 best teams in the country. But did they deserve to be in? That's a different conversation, I think. And I think Lane, when everybody came back for that Gator Bowl, that game was just that. And that was a pretty decent, Duke was down some guys, and the quarterback had transferred right before the bowl game. There was a lot of weird stuff going on there, but Ole Miss just wiped the floor with them. And I think it was just one of those things where it's see, look, if you had let us in, look what we could have done. But at the same time, they had every opportunity to take care of it themselves, and just to let a couple slip away. Again, three losses by 13 points is pretty. I think that's going to eat away at a lot of those guys.
Is Austin Simmons the real deal?
I think he's legit. Obviously he's replacing, arguably, he's one of the best quarterbacks in Ole Miss history, Jackson Dart. You can't question that. The first round pick, again, he's the first round quarterback for Ole Miss since Eli Manning. That's a long time ago. Jackson was probably just been born when Eli was doing that stuff. So it's, It's pretty remarkable how good Jackson ended up being. And I know he was a USC recruit and he went there, but it feels like I know he transferred to Ole Miss, but it felt like he was an Ole Miss guy. Like it felt like he was like a Lane Kiffin recruit, right? He was there for 3 years. He became an Oxford legend. Everyone loved him here. It's going to be hard to replace that. Not just the production, but the sort of charismatic leadership and the way that he really kind of held this team together. Jackson was a really unique personality in that everybody on the team liked Jackson Dart. And that's not to say people don't like Austin Simmons or anything like that. I just don't know if we know that quite yet. I think they're different personalities. But I think that, Jackson everyone gravitated towards Jackson. And when you lose that, I think it's a lot to expect from a guy who's never started the game to just like step into that same sort of role. That being said, he's done all the right things this offseason. He's graduated already, which is crazy. He's like been there for 2 years. I mean, God. Dude, what are you going to do the next couple of years, man?
He's 19.
It's crazy. I remember it was crazy when he reclassified like 2 years, I think it was. But graduating in 2 years is pretty remarkable as a Division I athlete, a high-level Division I athlete. Insane stuff. I think the talent's undeniable. You watch him throw a football, and it's just a little different. I know there's a lot of – he's left-handed. I think he's a little bit bigger, but – Tua gets brought up, right? Just in terms
he looks just like him, man.
Yeah,
he looks just like him. And I know the height, but it's very weird.
No, the release, it just looks different when it comes out of their hands, right? But again, this is a guy. He's not playing baseball anymore. He's totally focused. I think this offseason was really big for him in terms of getting the locker room all behind him, just in terms of, like I said, when you lose a guy like Jackson, you got to kind of start from square one in terms of who are you looking to. And I think Austin's done all the right things. He's not as vocal as Jackson. It's something he said he's been working on. He's more of a lead by example guy. But he's really smart. I think people really like him. And again, the talent is just unbelievable. I know it's a small sample size, but what he did against Georgia in that game when Jackson got hurt was pretty remarkable. That game could have gotten completely out of hand if he doesn't do what he does on that touchdown drive. I think he's legit. To expect him to put up a 30 touchdown, 4,500 yard season, whatever Jackson did last year, is probably not fair. But I think when it's done, when his time is done at Ole Miss, I think he's got a chance to be drafted really, really high. The ceiling is unreal with him.
To recap, if he stays on the normal timeline of a high school college student, we're sitting here having this conversation in late May. He is still not enrolling in college yet. He is still not taking, well, even if he's an early enrollee, I guess you would have done that. But if he just decides, hey, I'm a regular college kid, I'm going to show up in August and get on campus, he would still be 2 months away from that, and he has already graduated college. That's going to be the Ryan Williams is 17 years old thing to bring up on a broadcast this year, and it's crazy because we do need to process just how remarkable in itself that really is.
No, and it's a credit to him too for I think if you're a high-level football player, it can probably be easy to put academics on the back burner, but this guy is taking more classes than anybody needs to take to get through graduation. Again, he graduated high school early. I don't even know if guy went to prom. I mean, it's crazy like how his timeline has just moved up so much, but he's taken it all in stride and he doesn't look out of place. He holds himself, really, really well. He's mature. He sounds like a grown-up when you talk to him, and he sounds like a guy that you want as sort of the face of your program and of your organization. And I think that's really big because you don't know what you're getting from most true sophomore or for redshirt sophomores, but redshirt freshmen now it's sophomore. You don't have to worry about the maturity thing with him. He's going to pass all those tests easily. It was really funny though because he brought the Ryan Williams 17 thing. I think ESPN was tweeting about Austin Simmons graduating. I was like, oh no, they found it. Uh-oh. Here we go. Here it comes.
That's going to a Joe Test broadcast, and I mean, every single Joe Test broadcast, we're going to get that. It's going to be 11 o'clock local time for you guys, and you're going to have Joe Test shouting in your face about Austin Simmons already graduating college, when in reality, he should be a true freshman with his classes. And that's just not the way that this works. I love that. It's interesting because if he ends up being great, we'll look back on the Georgia possession, which was the biggest possession of Ole Miss's season. Let's call it what it is. And we'll say that's when we should have known. That's when we should have known this guy was going to be special, to have that kind of poise in that spot, to come into that game for an injured Jackson Dart and just calm everything down with that drive. It's monumental. If he doesn't end up being good, we'll look back on it as like a cautionary tale, much kind of like what Steve Angeli is at Notre Dame, where he has that huge drive against Penn State in the playoff game for Notre Dame. And then you're thinking, all right, that guy's going to be the starter. And then he ends up being a post-spring portal guy because he's not going to win that job. And it's interesting because this can go in a variety of ways. But, I do wonder, how much should we look into him passing up Walker Howard on the depth chart when that happened? Because I remember thinking even Ole Miss beat reporters were surprised to see that development.
I think that's the biggest thing is that, listen, Lane has not taken a ton of high school quarterbacks recently. It's been a lot of transfers. But he was the guy that they selected and had to move up a couple years. And, obviously he was a Florida commit before. He's the guy they chose to be eventually the successor. And, like you said, the Walker Howard stuff. Listen, I think for any of us who watched practice, it was clear Austin Simmons was better than Walker Howard. It was just are you going to have the cojones to actually put it on the depth chart, right? And tell this guy, hey, you're not the guy, hit the portal. Thanks for not, thanks, but no thanks. We appreciate your time here. I think it really says a lot about what they think of Austin, that even, listen, they've lost a bunch of quarterbacks this offseason, and the ones they've brought in, I don't think any reasonable person is like, ooh, are they bringing in competition for Austin Simmons? No, these are depth pieces. This is Austin Simmons' team. Even when Jackson was at Ole Miss, they brought in Spencer Sanders. They brought in legit competition. They're not doing that. This is Austin Simmons' team. I think they're really, really confident in him. If it doesn't work out in this, storybook way, so be it. But at the same time, I think it's really hard for me to see him not being at least a really, really good player. Because one, quarterbacks are always really good under Lane Kiffin and these offenses. And two, you just can't find that kind of talent and the mental processing and all the things that he brings to the table. It's rare. So, I do think the biggest thing was they didn't bring anybody in to challenge Austin Simmons. The challenge was Walker Howard, and Walker Howard, bye, man. I think he's at ULL now. And he can probably be a great player there. But it was very clear that everyone knew Austin Simmons was better and he was going to be the guy. And, Lane didn't play any games with this one.
Was it just that simple for why Walker Howard never became a thing at Ole Miss? Because I think when that transfer happened from LSU, everybody was like, whoa, that is really significant that he would make that move after his freshman year. Brian Kelly danced on him, and everybody was like, oh, this guy's going to be an LSU lifer. His grandpa's a quarterback, was an LSU quarterback. And it just never really materialized. And people will probably look back at this and wonder if Lane Kiffin's daughter and that relationship played a part in all of this, or if it's just Austin Simmons or what. But what did you just make of that whole situation and watching that guy go from he's next to he's gone and he never really had a chance?
Yeah, it is interesting because, again, when we saw the transfer, the first thing that goes through your head is, okay, well, here's the next one. Here's whenever Jackson's done, here's the next star quarterback at Ole Miss. He had all the accolades coming in. He was a huge recruit. Like you said, he's royalty at LSU. The Brian Kelly dancing thing. I forgot about that. It's playing in my head, and I wish it wasn't. I really do think it's as simple as Austin Simmons was just better. And it's nothing against Walker Howard. Again, I think Walker Howard could be a really good player. And if, in a different set of circumstances, he'd probably be a pretty solid SEC quarterback. But he was in a room that had Jackson Dart, a really established guy, and who wasn't going to lose the job. And, then you had, Austin Simmons, who it was pretty clear that he was winning people over in the room. So it is interesting though, because usually when you get that 4-star quarterback transfer, it's okay. Well, this one's pretty cut and dry. He's your next guy. But I do think it's a credit to Ole Miss though too, of they aren't just like putting the guys in who had the highest stars or the biggest recruits. Like they're going to play the guy who's better and the best guy. And that's not always the way it works in college football. There's a lot of politics. There's a lot of doing things to make people happy, especially in the transfer portal era. Through it all, Ole Miss Lane has done a really good job of playing the guys who they thought were better, and I think that was the case with Austin here.
It's the same reason why I held out hope that Luke Altmaier could win the starting job over Jackson Dart, and that it just didn't necessarily materialize.
Well, he's a great player.
And now he's a great player. He's doing really good things. Maybe a preseason top 10 team, maybe a playoff team that he's going to lead at Illinois. The timing of these things is really hard to predict the way that it plays out. And you just have to make that evaluation at the time. We talked about this a lot on the pod during the season because my co-host Will loved Ulysses Bentley and was blown away that guy couldn't get on the field. Did you ever get an answer to this about why he just was in Lane's doghouse when it seemed like he would have a wide open opportunity, especially with how much they struggled to truly find that elite back?
I think the moment where we realized that this was just very weird was against Florida when Micah Davis, who was a transfer wide receiver from Air Force, was the starting running back in that game. And Bentley was returning kickoffs. He was there. And as we saw, JJ Pegues was trying to pick up some short yardage and it failed. If they have, a better running back situation, maybe that game goes a little bit differently. It really did bite them. I mean, this was by far the worst running team that Lane's had. So I think when you looked, I think Henry Parrish, that made sense. Henry was an Ole Miss guy before. He knows the offense. He was good. I mean, he's having a really good year. Before he wrecked his knee against, I think it was Arkansas. But it was always very weird because I think it was against LSU when he broke that 50-yard run and everyone's like, where's this guy been? And it just seemed like every time he got in, he did something good for the most part. But I guess to answer your question, we never really got a direct answer, which it's not surprising. I think we knew how that question was going to go and how that answer was going to go with Lane. He's not going to give too much on the details of those sorts of things. It is, but that's another one of the all-time what ifs too. I mean, I know that Ulysses Bentley didn't test great at the combine, all these things, but he was good. He was productive. He was productive at Ole Miss. He was productive at SMU. It's hard to argue that he wouldn't have been better than like a walk-on wide receiver who was playing running back. That's one of the big what ifs too. Is if they run the ball a little bit better, I think a couple of those games go a little bit different. But that's I will never forget that press conference when someone went really hard in on Lane and Lane did not bite. Someone brought up Pro Football Focus stats and he was not impressed.
The Ulysses Bentley book that comes out years from now. Why I never played. Player tribute story.
To read it as well, man. Trust me.
I'll write the foreword. I don't care. I'd be into that. I really would. Pete Golding proved a lot of people wrong this year, and he was an easy punching bag at Bama, understandably so. How has he become arguably Lane's best chance to keep Ole Miss's floor high with late season playoff buzz sort of on an annual basis?
One, I mean, he's an elite recruiter, and I think we've seen that. Ole Miss under Lane hasn't really had problems getting elite offensive weapons, but can you get those really good defensive players from the high school ranks and even from the portal? Pete Golding has added a credibility where, listen, if you come and play for Ole Miss, you can develop into a first-round pick. It just happened, and that's with transfers, that's with high school guys. I think that, he took a lot of shots when he was at Alabama, right or wrong. But I think that his ability to recruit, and I think that now that he's established what he wants to do and the way he wants to play, late in the season, like you're going to have some grinded out games. It's going to be who can get off the field and who can make the defensive plays. And a few years ago, Ole Miss was not going to be that team. Remember Lane's first year, they gave up like 40 points a game.
It's bad.
It was atrocious. And now they gave up like 14 last year. I mean, it's pretty remarkable how this thing has turned. So I think he's done a great job. I think this is going to be an interesting year though too, to see, does it level back out to what it was the year before, where the defense was pretty good, but it was not a top 5 defense. You lose a lot of really, really impressive players from that defense. Can you do it again with different players, different pieces, and not skip a beat? I think we're going to learn a lot about Pete Golding. I think they're going to be really, really good again. I think they've recruited really well, and they've got a nice combination of portal and high schoolers. But to expect them to be a top 2 scoring defense, I don't know if that's fair. But he set the bar really high, and I think that really, if you look at Lane's career, everywhere he's been, this is by far the best situation defensively he's ever had. Going back to Tennessee, going back to USC. I mean, they are a legit defensive program. Their defense was better than their offense most of the time last year. Their offense got stuck sometimes. It was the defense that really bailed them out. So Pete Golding's done a great job. He's also just like the coolest dude ever. He's awesome. I think recruits love him. He is no nonsense. He's great. Also, occasionally plays quarterback during their like little scrimmages, and he's got good footwork, man. I was shook when I saw him take off for the end zone. He looked like Vince Young in 2006.
I was thinking more like Barney Rubble.
The feet kind of they start when he gets going though, it was impressive.
That's true. This is true. I can ask you this question because I'm sure you've kind of pondered it as it relates to your career and what your future is ultimately going to look like, the situation that you're in right now. And, moving forward, I do think it is just a fascinating thing that all college football fans find themselves asking. But what does the rest of the decade look like for Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss?
Man, ain't that the question? In 2022, I thought this era was over with all the Auburn stuff. But I think that it's going to be completely like situational of like, if the right job opens, then who knows what happens, right? But at the same time, I don't think Lane doesn't want to leave. Like Lane really likes it here, and he's established a program. I think he's comfortable in a small town. I think that kind of is good for his vibe, and his family's here. His son's going to Oxford High to play quarterback. I think it's if you had asked me a few years ago, I don't think there was any way in hell that Lane is here, through 2028 or 29, whatever it is. That's never been his thing, right? He's never stayed anywhere that long. But here he is. He's in the place he's been at the longest. He's comfortable here. He has free reign. And I think that's really big too, is he has an athletic director that, holds him accountable, but also lets him do what he needs to do to keep the program competitive when, listen, there are some things going against Ole Miss. They're never going to have the most NIL or the booster, all those sorts of things that Texas and Alabama and programs like that are going to have, but they spend on things they need to spend on, facilities, Pete Golding, all those sorts of things. So I think that situation is not something he takes for granted. And, I know they came up short last year, but like you could be a playoff team at Ole Miss. They should have been a playoff team at Ole Miss. A couple of things didn't go their way, but that was a playoff caliber team. So I think this idea that, I think maybe early in his career, there was a ceiling on like what you can do at Ole Miss, right? Of like, can you beat Georgia? Can you win those big games? And I know, they beat Georgia. I think that was a turning point for the program. It looked like it was going to be the turning point until a couple weeks later after the bye and the Florida game happened. But I think that these last couple of years have proven that he can win here. And would it be easier to win other places? Probably, but I think quality of life matters too. So I think he's happy here. He's genuinely comfortable. I think Ole Miss is really, really good for him, just in terms of, he's embraced the community's embraced him, and that's not something he's always had at his other stops. And I think he's old enough to realize that the grass isn't always greener. Again, say a perfect job opens up, who knows what happens then. Maybe the old Lane comes back and he dashes, but I think he's not looking to leave, and I think that's really, really big. I think it would take something pretty tremendous for him to leave. He's in a good spot, and I think his quality of life is pretty solid, and he's got a hell of a program going right now too.
List is pretty short now. It's pretty short. I don't know how long it is. I always talk about it multiple times throughout the offseason, but you kind of look at the programs that would actually be a fit and worth it, like an Ohio State or something like that. And even that would have to take some bold move, which now that feels less and less likely with Ryan Day and his new contract. And the Florida State situation, who knows if that's what they'd be interested in. But the list it's dwindled every single year. And if you're an Ole Miss fan,
you gotta be feeling great.
That's all you can hope for at this point, is to see that list continue to dwindle, to see all this turnover we've had in college football. And he's still there. That's good. Yeah. That's positive.
100%. I mean, there have been opportunities. We know that listen, whenever a coaching vacancy comes up, he's the first name on it. That's just the way it works. You know what you're getting into when you hire Lane Kiffin. Keith Carter knows that. He's always going to, Lane's always going to be one of those names that comes up. But there haven't really been any legitimate ones where you thought, okay, I think he would leave for this. Because, I don't think that those programs are really in better spots than what Ole Miss is right now. Ole Miss is in a really good spot. And, I know things can change really quickly in college football. Things can fall apart, things can get better. You never know what's going to happen. But I think in this era of college football, Lane is just so good for Ole Miss. And, Ole Miss is always a little bit of an underdog. And I think he enjoys sort of being, maybe not the hunter all the time. You would love to, of course, always be a top 5 team. That's just not always going to be the way it is at Ole Miss, but you can field top 5 teams, and I think that's really important. And but yeah, no, I mean, listen, when the A&M thing came and went, when the Auburn thing came and went,
Bama,
when the Bama thing happened, when Billy Napier they didn't fire Billy Napier, and that was the one everybody was talking about, right? Was Florida. We know how much Lane loves the beach, though. As I learned, Gainesville is not very close to the water. I learned that. I drove there from Oxford because it's just kind of hard to fly into.
Yep.
I didn't see much water for the most part, with all due respect to Gainesville. But yeah, I mean that seemed like the most recent one. But Billy Napier keeps doing what he's doing. Like they're not going to make a move. So like you said, the list does keep getting smaller and smaller of the programs that he would be a fit at, and that he would want to leave for. And I think the more success he has at Ole Miss, the less likely it is that he would want to jump ship.
To be fair, and nice pun, jump ship. I like that. To be fair, I live in Orlando, and I think I've been to the beach every weekend, like all but one weekend this month. So
really?
You can get there.
Okay. Yeah, So again, that was my first time in Florida. So how far is Orlando from Gainesville? And how far is
2 hours to Gainesville?
Okay, and
2 hours to Gainesville. To beach is like an hour and change.
Okay. So it's doable.
Yeah, I can do it.
I mean, we've got beautiful Lake Sardis here. The Mississippi lakes are beautiful this time of year.
Look, as long as you just give Lane a boat and give him some fishing, he's good. He's got that. He's got that. That's all that matters.
And no one was happier to be in Destin than Lane this past week. Come on, man.
That's why he was in such a good mood with Feinbaum. I mean, that's what this.
Shirt off.
It all circles back to that.
Come on, that's life.
Very true. Very true. Michael, Professor, appreciate the time. Looking forward to catching up in Atlanta in a few weeks.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate you.